He thought she was just the janitor. But when Ruth Ellison walked into the boardroom, laid down a black notebook, and fired the CEO with legal proof in front of the entire board, every smug face in that room went pale. They had no idea the woman scrubbing their floors had once built the entire empire they ruled. Hi, everyone. Today we're diving into a story that's going to leave you breathless. Imagine a woman, quiet, kind, steady, walking through the halls of a billion-dollar company in a faded gray uniform, her head slightly bowed, her steps light, so as not to be in anyone's way. She's the person everyone sees, but no one really looks at. For 15 years, she swept those floors, cleaned those restrooms, and polished the glass on boardroom doors, where powerful decisions were made by people who never once remembered her full name. But one day, one cold, calculated day, that same woman walked into the boardroom in a crisp navy blazer and fired the CEO. This isn't just a story about justice. It's about what happens when the underestimated decide they've had enough. This could happen to anyone, even you. So before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Drop it in the comments below. Let's begin. They called her Miss Ruth, not Ruth Ellison, not Mrs. Ellison, just Miss Ruth. Every night at 10:00 p.m., Ruth arrived at Thorne & Baxter Enterprises, a shining corporate tower in the heart of Atlanta, Georgia. The kind of place with imported marble floors, touchscreen elevators, and boardrooms named after Ivy League benefactors. It was a world built to honor, wealth, power, and prestige. But she belonged to none of those things. She belonged to the shadows. At 56, Ruth had learned how to disappear in plain sight. Her uniform, a pale gray janitor's jumpsuit, fit her thin frame loosely, its cuffs frayed and knees worn thin. Her shoes, bought years ago from a discount store, squeaked softly with every step. The elastic band holding her tight curls in a neat bun had lost its stretch, but she never replaced it. She didn't need to. No one looked at her long enough to care. As the night crew settled into their routines, Ruth grabbed her card and began her rounds. She started in the lobby, wiping down fingerprints from the glass doors, then worked her way up the elevator shaft floor by floor. She knew which faucets leaked, which doors squeaked, and which executive liked to sneak whiskey into their office drawer. Ruth saw it all, heard it all, but the people of Thorne & Baxter didn't see her. There was Ethan Marsh, a senior associate, who once dropped a half-eaten sandwich on the floor and barked, "You missed a spot," without even glancing her way. Or Monica Trent, the HR director, who once held a diversity and leadership seminar right in front of Ruth, then laughed with her colleagues afterward about how janitors don't count. Even the security guards who worked the same shift barely spoke to her unless they needed the break room wiped down after spilling coffee. To them, Ruth was permanent furniture, quiet, necessary, and unworthy of attention. But there was something they didn't know. Beneath that uniform, behind the silence, lived a memory sharp as glass and just as dangerous. 15 years ago, Ruth Ellison had not been Miss Ruth, the janitor. She had been the co-founder of this very company. She had stood beside her husband Jerome at their dining room table, mapping out routes for freight logistics across the Southeast. He handled trucking operations. She handled contracts, legal filings, and every dime of accounting. She had been the one to file their LLC, to negotiate the initial warehouse lease, to hire their first dispatcher, and she had done it all under the name Ruth Ellison. But then came the night everything changed. Jerome was overseeing a delivery on a rainy October night when his truck hydroplaned off I-20. The news came as a single phone call. No ceremony, no sympathy, just the facts: your husband is gone. At the funeral, Victor Langston, their so-called partner and old friend, gave a speech. He stood at the podium, offered a generic eulogy full of numbers and milestones, and never once said Ruth's name. Within a week, she was locked out of every account. Her keycard stopped working. Her name was scrubbed from the executive database. Legal documents were altered. Her role in the company vanished like chalk in the rain. No one confronted her. No one threatened her. They simply erased her. And Ruth, still in grief, still reeling, made one choice that shocked even herself. She did not fight. Not then. Instead, she waited. She changed her last name on paper, found a friend who helped her falsify a resume, applied for a janitorial job under the name Ruth Allen. The company hired her without blinking. After all, who would think twice about an older black woman applying to scrub floors? And so, night after night, Ruth returned. To the very building she had helped build. To the offices where her vision once guided the future. She came back not to be seen but to watch. She brought with her a small worn notebook with a black leather cover. In it, she recorded everything: whispered conversations, payroll decisions, contractor fraud, benefit cuts, and every time a worker cried in the hallway after being laid off with no warning. She documented every abuse, every unethical shift in policy, every careless move by executives too blinded by their own egos to notice the woman standing 5 feet away with a mop in her hand. Over the years, the notebook became her second heart. She guarded it like a sacred text, hiding it in a metal lockbox behind a loose panel in the janitorial supply closet. At first, it was just a coping mechanism, a way to process betrayal. But as the years passed, the entries grew more deliberate, more pointed. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was evidence. And Ruth knew exactly what she was building: a reckoning. Still, she never gave herself a timeline. She told herself she was just gathering facts, watching, waiting. Until one morning just before sunrise, something happened that made her realize she couldn't stay silent forever. Ruth didn't usually linger past the end of her shift. By 6:30 a.m., most of the building was still asleep, and she preferred it that way, avoiding the day shift crowd that might stare too long or ask too few questions. But that morning, something held her back. The night had been quiet. No emergency spills. No shouting executives stomping around on Bluetooth calls. Just the usual wipe, sweep, empty mop. Still, Ruth had taken her time in the staff locker room, folding her cleaning gloves with slow care, as if bracing herself for something she couldn't yet name. That's when she heard it. A soft whimper muffled by a row of dented gray lockers. Then a choked gasp, a voice too raw to hide. Ruth rounded the corner and saw her Lena Morris. Lena was the newest on the night crew. Maybe 23, barely older than Ruth's granddaughter. Always smiling, always polite. But now she was crumpled on the bench, her uniform wrinkled and damp, her phone clutched tight in her shaking hands. Ruth knelt beside her. "Lena." "I'm sorry," Lena sobbed. "I didn't want anyone to see me like this." Ruth sat down beside her, her voice low and even. "What happened?" Lena handed her the phone. On the screen was a hospital room. A small boy, maybe 5, lay in bed hooked to machines. His face was bruised. "Bandaged," my son," Lena whispered. "Car crash. His grandma called me from the ER." Ruth's stomach twisted. "I begged HR to let me take today off." "Just one shift," Lena continued. "But they said I'd be written up. Docked pay. Said I'd be seen as unreliable." She looked up, eyes swollen. "They told me to find someone to cover or just deal with the consequences. But I can't leave him alone in the hospital. I can't." Her voice cracked. Ruth didn't answer right away. Her hands were folded in her lap still. Her eyes were sharp but soft. She'd heard stories like Lena's before, seen the tears of workers who lost their health insurance, who got fired for being 5 minutes late, who watched promotions pass them by in favor of someone with the right skin color or pedigree. But this moment felt different, because in Lena's grief, Ruth saw her younger self 15 years ago. When she had knocked on Victor Langston's office door the morning after Jerome's death, still in morning clothes, only to be told by a secretary, "You no longer have access. You'll need to schedule an appointment with legal." That memory burned hot again. She rose, gently squeezing Lena's hand. "Go," she said. "Go to your son." "But my shift, I'll cover it," Ruth replied. "You don't owe anyone anything today." Lena stared at her. "They'll find out." "Let them," Ruth said quietly. "Sometimes the right thing is louder than the rules." As Lena left, Ruth returned to her cart, but her steps were slower. Her hands trembled. That night, she opened her lockbox and pulled out the black notebook. She flipped through its pages: financial audits, employee complaints, snapshots of forged documents, voice memos, copied to encrypted USB drives. She had it all. That was when she picked up her old flip phone, the one with only one number saved. Julian Rhodes, attorney, friend. The only soul who had known the full truth from the beginning. She hadn't spoken to him in over a year, but when he picked up, he didn't say hello. He said, "You ready?" Ruth exhaled. It's time to begin. The next 3 weeks were a quiet storm behind the scenes. Julian got to work immediately. He dug up the original LLC paperwork proof of Ruth's co-founder status. He retrieved the notarized documents showing the share transfers after Jerome's death, each legally binding and still valid. He confirmed Ruth's controlling ownership percentage 51.8%, just enough to call an emergency shareholder meeting without CEO approval. Ruth, in the meantime, kept mopping, kept sweeping, but she watched more closely than ever. Grant Delaney, the current CEO, was busy planning a new round of cost efficiency cuts. Ruth listened from the break room vents as he bragged about slashing overtime pay. Victor Langston, her old betrayer, was still on the board, now operating as an emeritus advisor. He liked to come in late, puffed up in a wool overcoat, and lecture young staff about grit. Ruth noted each time he passed the same janitor cart, he used to call that obstacle in my hallway. And the HR director, Monica, still ran meetings about employee morale while emailing policies that punished any worker who dared call in sick more than once a quarter. Ruth recorded every name, every word, every new injustice. The fire inside her didn't blaze like a storm. It simmered, focused. She wasn't coming back just to settle a score. She was coming back to rip the rot from its roots. And now, for the first time in 15 years, she wasn't alone. Julian called again 2 days later. The meeting is approved. You hold the votes. They'll have no idea until it's too late. Ruth didn't speak. She simply looked up at her reflection in the glass of the mop bucket. Her face was lined, her skin tired. But her eyes burned with something eternal, something unbreakable. 1 week, 7 days until justice stepped off the elevator on the top floor. And this time, they'd have to say her name. The 7 days leading to the boardroom showdown unfolded like a storm gathering behind silent clouds. Ruth didn't change her schedule. She didn't alter her routines. Each night she arrived at Thorne & Baxter with her mop bucket, her gloves, and her key card. She still smiled politely when a passing executive nodded absently. She still swept the corners of the lobby no one else noticed. But beneath her quiet movements, something fundamental had shifted. She had already turned in her resignation to the cleaning contractor. They didn't ask questions, just offered a "sorry to see you go" and told her she'd be missed. No one at corporate had any idea what was coming. Ruth kept her uniform clean, her shoes polished, and her cover story airtight. On the 4th night, she passed by the 9th floor marketing suite and overheard 2 managers laughing about overtime restrictions. If they don't like it, they can quit, one said. There's always someone else willing to scrub toilets for $10 an hour. Ruth jotted down the time and names in her notebook without breaking stride. That same night, she made a copy of the latest employee roster and highlighted the janitorial, staff, security, and warehouse teams. She wanted their names in the room with her, even if they weren't invited. These were the real architects of Thorne & Baxter, the ones who'd never been given credit. 3 days before the meeting, Ruth sat across from Julian Rhodes in a small private office he rented just for the occasion. On the table between them were 2 thick binders, one containing every legal document proving Ruth's original ownership and control rights. The other filled with the evidence she collected over the years: fraudulent invoices, illegal layoff orders, benefit reduction memos, and recordings of Grant Delaney's off-the-record comments. Julian looked over the pages with measured calm, but Ruth could see the fire behind his glasses. Once this begins, there's no undoing it. He said, not as a warning, but as a confirmation. Ruth nodded. I didn't wait 15 years to hesitate. Julian leaned forward. Do you want media involved? No, she replied. Not yet. I want them to see the truth for themselves first. No headlines, just the sound of everything crumbling under its own weight. He nodded, impressed by her restraint. The day before the meeting, Ruth returned home and laid out her outfit. A dark navy blazer, a crisp white blouse, gray slacks, and low-heeled black shoes. Nothing flashy, just enough to walk in with dignity. She pressed every wrinkle, polished her shoes, and smoothed her hair back into a neat bun. Then she sat down by her window and opened her black notebook one last time. The pages were worn now. Some corners curled, some ink faded. But the entries remained legible, each one etched with clarity and pain. She flipped to the first one, dated just 2 weeks after Jerome's funeral. July 3rd saw Victor Langston speaking with legal. He told them, no need to worry about the widow. I stood 3 feet away and he never looked at me. And another. September 14th. Employee Maria Gonzalez fired for missing a shift. Her son was in the ICU. No warnings given. And another. February 8th. HR memo calls for increased visual management standards code for pushing out older staff and people of color. She ran her fingers over each page like they were old battle scars. This notebook wasn't just documentation. It was her truth carved night by night in a world that had tried to silence her. Then came the morning, the one that would change everything. Ruth woke at 5:00 a.m. sharp, ate a small breakfast, grits, toast, and a hard-boiled egg. She dressed slowly, deliberately. She pinned a small silver brooch at her collar, one Jerome had given her on their 10th anniversary, a quiet reminder that he was still with her. At 7:00 a.m., she stepped into the lobby of Thorne and Baxter, not as Miss Ruth, but as Ruth Ellison, the woman they had tried to erase. The receptionist looked up, eyes widening slightly. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Ruth said evenly. "I have a meeting on the top floor. Shareholders session. My name is Ruth Ellison." The receptionist blinked, tapped something on the keyboard. The screen lit up with confirmation. "Oh yes, of course. Right this way, Miss Ellison." Ruth didn't smile. She didn't thank her. She walked straight to the elevator and pressed the button for the 12th floor. The elevator doors opened into a world that had never welcomed her. Leather chairs, polished floors, framed portraits of past CEOs, none of whom had ever cleaned the floors they walked on. Grant Delaney stood near the head of the boardroom table, sipping espresso and laughing with Victor Langston. Ruth walked in silently, Julian behind her, carrying a briefcase. At first, no one noticed. Then they did. Grant's smile faltered. "Excuse me, this is a private meeting. Maintenance access is restricted to Ruth," set her notebook on the table with a quiet thud. Julian spoke first. "My name is Julian Rhodes. I am legal counsel for Ruth Ellison, co-founder and current majority shareholder of Thorne and Baxter Enterprises." Silence. Grant blinked. I'm sorry." What Ruth looked around the room, locking eyes with each board member. "You all called me Miss Ruth. Never once asked what that name meant. I built this company with my husband. You erased me. And for 15 years, I've been watching, waiting for this moment." Victor paled. "That's not possible. She's just the janitor." Julian opened the binder and began distributing documents. "Here are the original formation agreements, notarized ownership transfers, and the voting rights Miss Ellison holds. Effective immediately, she is invoking her right to call a vote of no confidence." A young board member whispered to another. The founder, Julian continued. "You will find enclosed payroll records, benefit manipulation, and multiple HR violations under Mr. Delaney's leadership. These documents will be submitted to regulators should this meeting be interrupted or postponed. We recommend you listen." Ruth leaned forward, calm as ice. "You thought I was just a shadow," she said. "But shadows remember everything." And then she opened her black notebook. Page by page, she read aloud. Every injustice, every lie, every name. And no one in that boardroom could look away. The air in the boardroom felt like glass about to crack. Every board member sat, frozen eyes darting between Ruth and the documents in front of them. The overhead lights that usually cast a warm executive glow now seemed too harsh, exposing every flicker of doubt and guilt on their faces. Ruth remained standing, her hands steady on the black notebook, her voice unshaken. Page after page, she laid out what they all had chosen to ignore. March 22nd, she read an email from HR approving the termination of Samuel Park, a warehouse worker, without cause, just weeks after he raised safety concerns. His daughter was in the hospital when he was escorted out. She looked directly at the vice president of operations. "That was your signature, Mr. Klein." He looked down, suddenly fascinated by the grain of the boardroom table. May 7th, she continued a memo recommending the suspension of overtime pay for janitorial and security staff. Quote, "They're replaceable. No need to negotiate." Monica, the HR director, blinked rapidly. "That policy was reviewed internally," Julian cut in. "Reviewed, yes, but never approved by the board, which is a violation of Section 4B of your own internal bylaws. I'd advise you to refrain from further statements without legal counsel present." Monica closed her mouth. Grant Delaney, still standing near the window, tried to compose himself. "You're hijacking this company. You have no idea what you're doing." Running a business isn't about moral grandstanding. It's about results. Julian calmly opened a second folder. Let's talk about results then. He distributed another set of papers. Q2 and Q3 financials. Compared year over year. Under Mr. Delaney's leadership, net revenue has decreased by 14% while executive compensation has risen 28%. Bonuses were issued despite performance thresholds not being met. That's called misappropriation. Grant's face flushed. This is absurd, Ruth interrupted. No, what's absurd is a company where janitors cry in broom closets because they can't afford a sick day, where warehouse workers are laid off to fund a cocktail party for the board, where I, one of the people who built this from the ground up, had to clean vomit off a carpet last week while you signed a deal in that same room. She stepped forward slowly, notebook in one hand, the other clenched in a quiet fist. You think I don't know how this company runs? I knew every contract Jerome ever negotiated, every client meeting, every truck route, and for 15 years I knew exactly what you all were doing. I stayed silent not because I was weak, but because I was watching. Victor finally spoke, his voice dry. Ruth, it wasn't personal. We had to move forward. We thought you'd be okay. She stared at him for a long moment. You didn't think at all, Victor. You counted on me disappearing. Julian placed a final document on the table. As legal representative for Miss Ellison, I now call for a formal vote of no confidence in CEO Grant Delaney and for the removal of all board members found complicit in ethical and legal violations. Grant scoffed, looking toward the others. Are we really doing this based on her notebook and some paper trails? No one answered. The young board member, Jonas Mercer, the only one who hadn't spoken slowly, raised his hand. I vote yes. Another hand went up, then another. Victor sat back in his chair, defeated eyes staring past the room like he was seeing a younger version of himself, the one who had once shaken Ruth's hand and promised her loyalty. One by one, the votes were cast. When it was done, Julian made it official. As per company bylaws and the controlling shareholders' rights, Mr. Grant Delaney is hereby removed as CEO of Thorne & Baxter Enterprises, effective immediately. All associated executive privileges are revoked. 2 security guards previously stationed near the elevators stepped into the boardroom, not with force, but with presence. Grant's jaw clenched. You'll regret this. The company needs me. Ruth met his gaze evenly. No, Grant. The company needs honesty, and it needs to start seeing the people who've kept it alive. Without another word, Grant gathered his tablet, his leather planner, and what little dignity he could salvage, and walked out. The silence he left behind was heavier than any shouting match could have been. Julian turned to Ruth. Your next steps? She nodded. Restructuring begins today. But first she opened a third folder. This is a list of employees terminated without proper review, denied benefits, or forced into unpaid overtime. I want each case reopened, and I want outreach to start this week. Several board members nodded, still stunned but attentive. And one more thing Ruth said. From now on, no executive policy will be enacted without review by a workers' advisory council. That includes janitors, drivers, security, and warehouse staff. This company doesn't belong to the elite anymore. It belongs to all of us. She glanced out the window. Morning sunlight poured over the Atlanta skyline, bathing the boardroom in a golden light. For the first time in years, it didn't feel artificial. Victor stood. His voice was quiet now, no trace of the old bravado. You were always the heart of this company. I just never wanted to admit it. Ruth didn't respond. She walked to the head of the table, not with triumph, but with purpose. She didn't sit. She didn't need to. Her presence alone had already changed everything. This isn't the end, she said. It's the beginning. For every person you thought was invisible. And then Ruth Ellison, the woman once dismissed as just another mop wielder, looked around the room full of people who finally saw her. She closed the notebook, and the silence that followed was not fear but respect. The ripple effect of that morning traveled through the building faster than a press release ever could. By 9:00 a.m., whispers had reached every hallway. From the loading docks to the call center floor, from the second floor HR suite to the 15th floor legal wing, people were saying the same thing: Miss Ruth isn't who we thought she was. But by then, Ruth Ellison had already stepped into the CEO's office. Not to claim the leather chair or admire the view, but to open the blinds, pull up the old carpeting, and begin dismantling the architecture of fear and hierarchy that had controlled Thorne and Baxter for far too long. She didn't do it with grand speeches or sweeping declarations. Instead, her first act as CEO was simple, a company-wide message sent to every email inbox from janitorial to executive. We will meet today at 2 p.m. in the main auditorium. Everyone is welcome. There will be no podiums, no titles, just people. When employees filed into the room that afternoon, the energy was like nothing anyone had felt before. Normally, this kind of gathering would have involved stiff suits, jargon-laced presentations, and a sea of anxious faces. But this time, the air buzzed with something entirely different. Hope. Ruth walked onto the stage in the same navy blazer she had worn to the boardroom. But this time, she wasn't flanked by lawyers or security. She stood alone, hands relaxed at her sides, eyes clear, heart full. "I won't waste your time with flowery speeches," she began, her voice steady, "because many of you have had your time wasted for years." A quiet murmur of agreement flowed through the crowd. "For 15 years," she continued, "I've walked these hallways at night. I've seen what happens behind the scenes. I've watched as people were overlooked, discarded, punished for being human. I've cleaned messes caused by people who never learned how to clean up their own." A few people chuckled nervously at first, then genuinely. "I came back here not just to reclaim what was stolen from me," she said, her voice growing stronger, "but to make sure no one else here is ever treated like they don't matter." Ruth stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "We will reinstate back pay for all overtime withheld since last year. We will launch an independent investigation into every termination over the past 3 years. If you were fired unfairly, you will hear from us." "Not a form letter, a person," gasps echoed across the auditorium. "And starting next month, every department will select a representative to join a rotating worker advisory panel. You will have a seat at the table, not just a suggestion box. No more executive decisions made behind closed doors. You've earned better." One hand raised Alonzo Green, a longtime truck driver with calloused hands and silver in his beard. He stood slowly. "Miss Ruth," his voice trembled. "I don't know if you remember me, but I saw you once, maybe 12 years ago. You were cleaning the back hallway. I smiled, but I never said anything." Ruth nodded gently. "I remember." Alonzo swallowed hard. "Why didn't you do this sooner?" The room fell silent. Ruth didn't flinch. "Because I needed the truth to be undeniable," she said. "Because power when used too soon becomes noise. But when used at the right moment, it becomes justice." She let that settle. The room hung in stillness, heavy with realization. "That moment is now," she added softly. Over the next few weeks, change came fast. Ruth promoted Deborah Santos, a former HR assistant who had once been disciplined for questioning company policies, to Director of People and Integrity. She elevated Jamal Bryant, a forklift operator with a perfect attendance record and years of overlooked loyalty, to Logistics Supervisor. And she asked Cynthia Morris, the young mother whose heartbreak had triggered Ruth's decision, to help develop a new family leave policy that prioritized empathy over red tape. Ruth also reopened the employee cafeteria and removed the management-only seating area. "If you eat under this roof," she said, "you eat as equals." The resistance came as expected. Whispers from middle managers clinging to the old ways. A few investors voiced concern about unorthodox leadership. One even suggested she step aside for someone more seasoned in modern business strategy. She invited them all to a transparency forum and then walked them through financials that showed the hemorrhaging losses caused by former executives' self-dealing. She showed them projections built on restored employee trust and retention. By the time she was done, not one objection remained on record. Still, Ruth didn't let herself get comfortable. Each day she walked the halls, stopping to listen, not to correct or command, but to hear. She helped restock cleaning supplies in the janitor's closet. She asked warehouse staff what safety upgrades were most urgent. She held lunches with frontline workers and stayed late to answer emails herself. Her calendar, once blanked out for mop rotations, was now filled with meetings titled things like "Listening Session Night Shift Team" or "Review Broken Elevator on Floor 6. She made herself visible, not as a boss, but as a reminder the people who built this place could also lead it. And then came the day 6 months later when the company reached a milestone. Not just in profits, which had stabilized, or in productivity, which had quietly increased. No, the milestone was a note, a folded slip of paper slid under Ruth's office door. No name, just a simple message in shaky handwriting. Thank you for reminding us that we matter. A once-forgotten worker. Ruth read it once, then again. Then she placed it gently beside her black notebook, now closed for good. She no longer needed it. The building itself had begun to remember.